You were all waiting for us to do another scrolling review show, and here it is with a spoiler right at the beginning because we're going to be talking about what MSN believes, or at least on the article they contracted, are the 10 worst controllers of all time. And spoiler alert, you can already see who the first one listed is, but that's okay. So, Mike, did you get a chance to kind of go through this list prior to this review here?
Yeah, I gave it a scroll. I didn't really read their opinions on it, only because I have my own opinions about most of these.
Yeah, likewise. And so there were a couple controllers that we're going to hit here that I mean, so a couple that I was vaguely aware of, and then there was two that I had never heard of, and they both sounded pretty horrific. So we'll be able to kind of go through this. So we're just going to kind of cruise through the list, talk about what our thoughts are on each of the controllers, if any. And as we mentioned on the spoiler, to start things off, no big shock. We've mentioned this multiple times on shows, the Atari Jaguar controller, the 2 tons of fun controller. So, your takeaways?
Yeah, so I have used an original Atari Jaguar controller. It is not fun. It's old. If that looks not super ergonomically designed, I assure you, it's worse when you have that in your hands. Also, you may notice from that picture, there's a lot of buttons on there. And they actually didn't stop there. This was the pack-in controller. They came out with, I don't know if they called it a pro version, but it was like a pro version controller, which upped it to 6 buttons and added shoulder buttons as well. Still kept the full number pad on the front of it. So essentially taking it to over 20 buttons on the controller. So essentially you're just holding a keyboard to play and trying to play a game with it, but not using, the typical controls that WDAS and stuff that you'd expect on there, but holding a keyboard and trying to use it like a controller, like an Xbox controller. It's ridiculous. That said, I like Jaguar though. Jaguar, I do think is an underrated system. I think it gets picked on a lot and is misunderstood. And there are a handful of truly great games for it, but they're hard to play with that controller.
Yeah, it ergonomic train wreck. I mean, I guess it's of its time. So kids out there, that keyboard is laid out like a push button telephone, which these were ways phones worked. People would have a phone in their house. And if you go back a little further, they used to have ones with dials, but we won't get into the caveman time. But it's a phone keyboard, the old phone touchstone keyboard, which is interesting to see. Yeah, and so certainly deserving to be on the list. I would also agree 100% with Mike that don't judge the console by the controller entirely. The game's out there, and it's mentioned at the tail end of this article. It's like the good news is if you do emulation, you can play these games with any controller you like. That's a big win with Jaguar. Good games that you
Oh
can
yeah.
actually now play with a good controller. We've talked about the Philips CDI before, and if the quality of the gaming experience on the Philips CDI was not painful enough for you, they doubled down by giving you a hospital bed remote to to control it. So they're not much good about this one in any respect. I guess slightly better ergonomically than a Jaguar controller because you can kind of hold it in one hand, but still buttons look too small. The it just looks very horrible for me. But you didn't need a whole lot of controls to advance the video on demand that the CDI was. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So my grandparents were, I want to say early adopters because I don't remember a lot of people having them at the time, but those Craftmatic beds that you could kind of like lift up and down. And they had like a little controller that looked just like this. And like Kelly said, the hospital bed style thing on there. Yeah. So I did you ever use a CDI, Kelly?
I did not. I'll
So
like
I
maybe once in a store display for a
yeah,
second or two.
store displays were my only physical hands-on. CDI fascinated me though. It's such a weird thing. So for anyone who doesn't know, it's not really a game system or really any one thing. It was essentially trying to be like a consoleized PC. And because of that, it it failed at everything because it was trying to be too many things. They wanted you to watch movies and listen to music and play games and do anything that you could do on your PC, but without a keyboard and through your TV, which makes doing a lot of that kind of stuff cumbersome. We'll get to that on another one later on this same list, but not having a keyboard makes the consoleized PC a little cumbersome to use. It also had some, I don't remember if it was maybe a little later in its not super long lifespan, but they shifted focus heavily to gaming, or at least from what I remember. Maybe it's just because I was into video games at the time, so that's the ads I noticed. But it seemed like they really made a hard shift in their focus to gaming. And I don't know if you can tell from that, that doesn't seem like you can control a lot of games with that, and you couldn't. And they did eventually come out with like a game controller for it, but again, the install base of the CDI was so small to begin with. There is no emulation options for this that I'm aware of, at least nothing that works well or consistently. What most people know the CDI from now is Super Nintendo's second failed attempt at getting into the world of CD-ROM. So the most infamous that most people remember is Nintendo partnered with Sony to make the Nintendo PlayStation, which was going to be a CD add-on to the Super Nintendo. Nintendo decided they didn't need Sony. Sony didn't know anything about video games. Kicked them to the side. Sony decided to convert all of their effort towards making video games just to get back at Nintendo, and it worked out for them. That that went pretty well. You've probably heard of the PlayStation, just the Sony PlayStation. While Sony was developing that without Nintendo, they decided to hook up with Philips to make some CD-ROM titles, which they also backed out of that deal. And once the dust up over that was settled, Philips was allowed to release some Nintendo properties on the CDI, and that's what it's most known for now is some really extraordinarily bad Mario and Zelda adjacent games that Nintendo tries really, really hard to erase from the internet. Really hard.
Yeah, kind of like a Star Wars Christmas special.
Yeah.
All right. Now you're gonna probably get confused here because it could be like two controllers in a row here, I believe. Kind of feel like it's the same controller, or they at least they're close if they're not back to back. The Intellivision controller. So it gives props early on that this is early on in the gaming environment. So one of the first home consoles comes out. Uh, remember that uh, telephone I was telling you about, that mythical home telephone? The cord you see there is a lot like the cord that was on the difference to the receiver to the base. So just another callback to that, another keyboard that is very much like a touch-tone phone. And while I guess aesthetically pleasing, not a great D-pad in terms of that. So a lot of problems with this one. So not good. I would have given, they're on the money so far. I agree. All these are pretty bad experiences so far. Your thoughts on the television controller?
So I did use one of these. And going back to the CDI for a second, I did play it in a store display. So I did use that controller as well. I did use one of these. And maybe it's just because I grew up in the Nintendo Sega age of controllers where they were a little more ergonomically designed. Sure, we weren't at the PlayStation Xbox level of comfort yet, but they realized human hands needed to fit on this in a way that made sense. So it was always weird going back to some of these earlier controllers. I have never ever been a fan of the number pads on controllers, and I felt like this was something. So for people who aren't familiar, in the what would happen is the games that would utilize these number pads would come with overlay cards that you would put on top of them, and then you would play with that. The problem is, as you can imagine, cards would get damaged and lost and things like that. So unless you knew what they were, it made retro gaming in a sense almost impossible. You couldn't, sell used games and things like that if you didn't have these cards because people wouldn't know how to play them. It's just stupid. It's overly complicated. And for whatever reason, Atari tried to bring this back when they did the Jaguar. That's what that number pad is. A handful of games came with overlays that you put over the number pad. The only one that I'm aware of that in any system that use this in a beneficial way would be Doom for Atari Jaguar because it let you select your weapons without having to cycle through them, which you couldn't even do on the PC. You had to cycle through the weapons on the PC. So I'm anti number pads. So this just this feels like sure it's maybe slightly better than the CDI in that there's more buttons. So it seems like you can control more, but not a fan.
Yeah. Yeah, even the Atari 2600, at least they had the good sense to say, we'll give you real controllers like a joystick and a spinner to those. But there was also a version that took overlays and had the button arrangement as well. And most of these games are coming out before there was a thing called the internet. And so if you did happen to lose one, you couldn't just go Google it and find a new one and print it off. That was not an option. So if you lost it, you were pretty much dead in the water. All right. Wow, this looks similar, doesn't it? Maybe. Listen, so ColecoVision got your television or your telephone receiver cord again on the back, a little springy cord. They've moved they've moved it up the the D-pad controller spinner to the front. Super interesting button placement in terms of the left and right side. And again, return to the telephone keypad. Uh, has all the bad qualities of the previous one, and I think it probably not great for overlays even.
Yeah, it's exactly what Kelly just said. It's everything that didn't work about the previous one, only now less useful for overlays. But yeah, I'm not gonna. There's nothing that's gonna shake me on my keypad makes sense in a game controller stance.
No, this just reinforces it. Okay, um, this fine young gentleman is demonstrating the Sega Activator, which was something I was thankfully unaware of
Oh, Kelly.
until this point in time. So as I understand it, beams of light are shot up from the base, and then as you break that beam of light on the various sides of the octagon, whatever the shape is down there, the stop sign shape down there, um, it would be a button. So I'm guessing your A button, your B button, all those types of things. Um, so you can have all the danger that you can get into with virtual reality with none of the precision or control, I would say. And if there is some purpose to the one back behind you, you're not going to be able to see a screen. So I don't really know. So this seems horrific to me, and I wasn't aware of it, and I hate it.
So I was very much aware of the activator. I didn't have it, but very much aware of it. It was one of two super weird controllers or peripherals or however you want to think of it that Sega came out with. So while the Wii gets all the attention for popularizing motion controls, Nintendo was obsessed with motion controls from the very beginning. There were motion controls for the original NES. They only worked with like two games and worked as a stretch, but it existed. There was like a black square that you would hook up and you punch into it. It worked with like Punch Out and one other game. And again, worked as a stretch. The activator looked cool when it was announced, but even as a kid, and even without having it, as soon as Sega explained how it worked, it was really obvious that it was terrible just from the start. So the way it was shown in commercials and things were with the 4 or 5 boxing or fighting games that it actually worked with because there was only a few. This was their answer to Nintendo trying to push motion controls. And Nintendo, again, had a few different motion controllers. So this was their answer to them. It's the way it shows you. So they used like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, and they would show you people punching and kicking, and then the corresponding character movements on the screen. That's not how it works. It's what Kelly was saying, where you had to move in one direction and that would equal a button press. So let's just say moving forward, so going over the beam forward, whether you're punching, kicking, whatever, would be right. So it would your character would just do whatever A was, not what you're doing. So if A is punch and you kick, the character still punches on the screen. Things like that. So it's terrible. That's as slow and cumbersome as it sounds like it is. It makes most games absolutely impossible to control. And the few games that it worked with, again, real heavy air quotes on that. It made the fast paced action games really slow and terrible to play. Um, I can't remember if I tried it, but I did see a couple of these in the wild. More interesting, and I'm surprised it's not on here. And I can't remember the name. I'm sure I can Google it. Um, Around this same time, Sega also came out with a vest you would wear. Again, fighting games were really big at the time. So the vest had speakers built into it that would give you these kind of like low vibrations. So think like a rumble pack on your chest. And the idea was that if you were hit in the game, it was like you were getting hit. So that also didn't take off, but I can see where that could work a little bit better than this. Like this, just even as a little kid, was like, there's no way that's going to work. As soon as I understood how it worked, that your movements equal button presses on a regular controller, not what you're doing. So you're just flailing around like an idiot and doing the most rudimentary controls in the
But you will get a six pack, so that's nice. So pretty. Yeah, so blue ribbon to this one in terms of this collection of unpleasant controlling experiences. I can't imagine anything much worse than this. So this for me was top of the pile or bottom of the pile, however you want to say it. All right. We could watch a video on calibration, but we're not. So how dare they? How dare they
game.
put the Nintendo 64 on the list? That is, how dare they? So the guy must have been drunk. I don't know what he was doing, but I guess there are a few folks that point out there's some challenges to the placement of all the various controls, and there are some issues there. But I was able to always overcome those and have a great experience. But um, I might be a more staunch defender of the Nintendo 64 controller in its original format than you are. So I will stand by my how dare they, but your thoughts?
So the way the person is holding the controller in this image is how Nintendo intended people to hold it. This is what they intended. So it wasn't like you're holding it because the way most people held it, from what I remember, and the way that I held it was like you were kind of just reaching for the middle prong as your way to move around, which made it awkward to hit the buttons and things like that. You were meant to kind of hold it sideways using that as your D-pad. And then there was also another D-pad button with its own prong to hold for games that utilize that. But it just made some of the buttons inaccessible at any point. while you were playing. So I think for people like Kelly who were early adopters to this system and got used to it, this makes sense. But for me, like my natural way that I want to hold the controller just doesn't work. So I'm just constantly fighting against what feels natural when I'm doing it. So I do have the Warrior 64 controllers, and I've been looking at a Tribute 64 and things like that, which rearrange it to a more, modern sensibility. And that makes a lot more sense to me. So I have come to like these a little bit more, but I remember like the first few times that I used them playing over friends' houses when Nintendo 64 was relatively new. It wasn't a great experience holding this controller.
Yeah, I think you're onto something that it was the fact that I spent a lot of time with this controller and just kind of accepted this as my lot in life and figured out how to do it because even to the extent, while there's no doubt the Warrior 64 the controllers, the kind of reformatted one, are much more logical, make a lot more sense. But when I'm doing like Star Wars Racer, I started doing it with and actually even with the GoldenEye. I started doing it with the Warrior controller, and I said, "Oh crap!" I had to go back and pulled out one of the OG ones. I was like, I can't do it. I'm too old to relearn." So I went back to the perhaps not ideally configured, but still lovable Nintendo 64 controller, in my opinion. Okay, here's the other one that. So I'd heard of the Pippin. We actually talked about the Pippin on one of our shows one time. Apparent, and one of the things I missed on it is that this basically can operate as a low end Mac as well. Uh, Emphasis on low, I would think. It does have that kind of problem that Mike mentioned that sometimes the keyboard's a handy thing to have, and so that's interesting there. Uh, this seems really bad to me too, just in terms of I've not had hands-on experience with the Pippin controller. I'd actually feel a little dirty if I had for some reason. I don't know why I want to say that, but it just seems raw to me. But also doesn't seem laid out particularly well. Particularly, I don't care for the three buttons kind of across that section at the bottom where I kind of think my thumbs would be on regular basis. And unless I don't know, I'm not sure what all their functions are, but I'm not necessarily sure that this would work out really well for me. And the buttons, the blue, yellow, green, red buttons, uh, look really cheap to me. So, where you at on the Pippin controller, sir?
So I have held a Pippin controller. I also, so a little backdoor volleyball for everybody. I wrote an article for One Up magazine years ago, the online video game magazine, about the worst consoles, and I put the Pippin on there. And some Mac fans got super mad. They were very triggered because how dare you point out that Apple has released failed products? You're supposed to ignore those like they never happened. But the Pippin did happen. And I don't know if it's super clear from this picture because they have it at an angle, which I actually think makes it look better than it is. So you have to picture that that curvature seems like you could grab those handles and control it, but you cannot. This is shaped like a boomerang, kind of. It's a much more extreme curve than it looks like, with everything kind of shoved into the middle. So your hands are actually up where the buttons are, not holding those curves like you would say something more ergonomic like a Xbox controller. You're not holding these. Your hands are up here. So it's as stupid and terrible feeling as it seems. And essentially what you're looking at, I don't know for maybe a younger viewer might not pick up on this. This kind of is like the early controllers for PCs, but the buttons ripped off and put onto an uncomfortable boomer. That's essentially what this is. But those cheap looking buttons and the weird D-pad and everything, that's just an early PC controller, but smashed into the center in the worst way you could onto a terrible controller. This would be pretty high up on the list for me.
Yeah, it looks bad, and they don't miss much, but they do miss sometimes, and they missed here. So,
Yeah.
the Mattel Hyperscan controller looks like it almost could be usable.
Yeah.
Um, Looks like probably you're not going to get that high quality button response or D-pad response, which I think tracks that that's not how it does. And it also, uh, they're getting close, but they're not there yet. So I think this guy probably deserving to be on the list. But to me, I think probably a big chunk why this is on the list probably has to do with the quality as much as the layout.
Yeah, Kelly nailed it. The Hyperscan was just a poor quality unit, and everything was very cheap and poorly made. The layout's not really the problem here. Like Kelly said, like this is pretty close to what we've come to expect now from controllers. So it's not so much the layout's the problem the way it was on Jaguar or the Pippin, because again, Apple can fail. I'm sorry, kids, but they can. Um, so it's not so much the layout. I think this is just an overall Hyperscan sucked and the quality was poor kind of thing. So in that sense, personally, if I was writing a list like this, I probably wouldn't put that on here because I feel like this is more about overall quality than the controller design.
Yeah, yeah, I think, if it was cheapest poorly made controller list, it's on
Right.
100%. Right. So, Ouya, how'd I do? Good. All right.
That's it.
Ouya. So, in apparently acrylic, the buttons are kind of marked. I do identify the letter possibly A and possibly, yeah, I don't know. The lettering looks almost alien to me on the buttons.
The
I
lettering
do have,
spells out Ouya.
it does. It doesn't help me out though. Not what I'd be looking for. Um, uh, Two analog control sticks and a D-pad, uh, in a big old blocky control format. So this was one too that is crowdsourced, started hot, at least for the first week. And then as people started to interact with it more, uh, this is kind of a joint venture of problems between the council and the controller. But I mean, this has all the elements and all the elements kind of in the right places inside. But you're putting a Ferrari motor in a Pinto on this thing. This body shape, this whatever doesn't look too great to me. This is another one I am glad to say I do not have hands-on experience with. I don't think I'd enjoy it though.
Yeah. So the Ouya saga was really interesting. I watched this all really closely when it was happening. Um, and it was one of those things that as it got closer and closer to actually releasing, sort of like the activator, people could spot the cracks in the ideas here. So this was the early days, like crowdfunding was still relatively new when this came out. And I don't know if anybody had ever tried to crowdfund a console before, but they'd certainly never done it as successfully as this. And I believe, at least at that time, it was like the most successful Kickstarter campaign ever. And they made like a couple $1 million were raised for this, like an insane at that time, absolutely insane, unheard of amount of money. Kickstarters that were successful got like a couple $1,000s. This was millions of dollars for people to get these. And there was lengthy and numerous videos put out about the extensive design work that went into this controller and into the console itself and all the things it was going to be able to do. And essentially, once it released, people realized that what the Ouya was just an Android box that you could just buy on your own anywhere, redesigned for them, of course, their proprietary design of it. But it was just an Android box that just played Android apps. And to be fair, it wasn't very expensive. So there was that. But people were super let down when they realized what it was. And the controller itself, so if I remember correctly, is metal. The controller, at least part of it is metal. And essentially what it is it's an Xbox controller, which existed at the time. It's an Xbox controller without the curvature. It's just blocky. And they took credit for that design for literally just copying an Xbox controller and taking the curvature out of it. So it's like if you were holding your Xbox controller and you're like, man, I wish this was a little less comfortable. Ooh, yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I wonder if it is that. It looks like it might be that precious metal aluminum.
I think it is without I did no research, obviously, getting ready for this, but if I remember correctly, and I held these, and I knew people who were part of the Kickstarter and people who went out and bought it because this was in retail stores and a lot of retail stores, and there were a lot of them because it was small. It's just an Android box. So it was just a little Android box and this controller in a little box, and it was, I don't know, $150 or something like that. So I mean, it was reasonably priced for what it was, but people were immediately disappointed. And it was one of those things that like there was so much hype over the Kickstarter, and it was exciting to kind of see it happening. Like, wow, this independent console is going to come out, and it's raised millions of dollars. And then as it went on, it was like, oh, this is just an Android box. It just plays apps on a box that you plug into your TV. Oh man.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I do
and
believe that silver was a metal plate on the front of this.
yeah, and people have come a long way of taking either Android or Linux boxes now and packaging them as retro gaming platforms and including controllers that are, while maybe not overly functional, at least better ergonomically than this. So, and apparently the button stuck a lot. So that would be a problem. How dare they? How dare they do this as well? I again am completely, no vision, no vision, MSN. Come on. What are you thinking? Um, the Amiga CD32 controller, also the shape of the controller for the uh, Amiga 500 Mini. They kind of carried that in a weird kind of mashup of Amiga products, but I'm glad they did. To me, not a bad little controller. You could probably carp a little bit about responsiveness on the D-pad and the kind of button quality, but you got it fits in your hands reasonably. It's a little maybe a little small, but it's not bad. Shoulder buttons are of the most accessible of any controller I've used, and I know I just didn't find it to be. I don't think it's deserving of this list. How dare they? Your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, so first off, I should point out a lot of people like this controller. When they announced that they were reissuing this as the official controller for the A500 Mini, there was tons of excited people online. In fact, most people I think feel this was the best part of the CD32 was the controller. So the CD32, going back to what we alluded to earlier, was a consoleized version of an Amiga, which an Amiga was a computer. So for a lot of the software, it still required you to get a keyboard and different things to hook up to it, essentially deconsoleizing it and turning it back into just an Amiga, defeating the entire purpose of what they had done. So I understand why the CD32 in and of itself wasn't super well received. Um, but this controller was. People fondly remember this, even if they don't fondly remember the console itself.
Yeah, I mean, and clearly this is the last one on the list, and so clearly they ran out of ideas and said, "Well, let's just pick another controller," and they were wrong to do so. But and I do have hands-on experience, at least with a version of this, and it's just fine. It's just fine. What do you know, MSN?
And yeah, I'm positive now that it was the metal plate on the front of it. That's why the buttons on the Ouya stuck because this metal plate that they had advertised as like the space age technology of like no other controllers are metal. and that's what they would stick on is the metal plate.
Yep, that would make a ton of sense.
Yeah,
The button gets a little bit squished over to the side under a piece of metal. It's going nowhere.
yeah.
Yeah. So it was fun to go through that list. Did you see anything missing, folks? If you did, step one, like and subscribe to the Bog Panda YouTube channel. Step two, watch 3 videos on the Bog Panda YouTube channel. Share them, give them all a like. Step three, watch 50 Hard Nose. It's the world's shortest podcast, published daily. And then step four, if you don't have a retro gaming console, go buy one. Super Console X, perfectly good choice. RG35XX, as long as Mike doesn't order it for you,
Yeah,
good choice
apparently.
on that. And then download a bunch of free ROMs that we have on Bog Panda Vision, our micro homebrew development site. Also, Doom levels being updated pretty regularly right now. So, our current map of Boom Panda is out there. That's Doom 2 format. First 3 episodes are exclusive Bog Panda content available free to you, the Bog Panda listener. So check that out if you do Doom. And I keep calling it a Super Nintendo as I've been editing some of our videos. I keep calling Dr. Mike's Lab Super Nintendo. It's an NES, right? It's an NES lab.
NES.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my apologies for that. Um, but NES games out there, several Game Boy games out there, and more coming, and the Doom levels. So I don't know what step you're at now, but then step, we'll say 6, comment on this video and let us know if you felt either we were wrong or they were wrong. Uh, Hard to believe we were wrong, but we're open. Not really open, but you can let us know anyway. And feel free to send MSN a how dare they on the Nintendo 64 and CD32 controllers being in there because it's highly offensive to me. Um, so I've said my piece. Mike, do you have anything to say before we wrap things up?
Um, I so the one I don't think should be on there because I think it was just a commentary on the cheaply made console. Um, to a degree, I guess you could almost apply that to the Wii as well. But the buttons did stick. I do remember that, so I'll give it that. The CD32 and the Nintendo 64, while I don't love the Nintendo 64 controller, I understand that people who are early adopters of that do because they got used to it. That's, their thing and they love it. I get it.
It
I've
had
become a huge fan of the console,
it
but it
had a
is hard
trigger,
to.
Mike. It had a trigger.
I know. I know, Gil.
It's so awesome. A trigger.
And same thing with CD32, though. I mean, CD32, the controller is the main positive thing that people point to with the console. So I don't know that I would have included those on my list. Is there something you would have included as a worst controller that they missed?
Um, so I don't remember what the Odyssey controller was. I think it was pretty darn close to the Intellivision, the early Intellivision one. But I do remember it was pretty awkward as well. But in with the Odyssey controller, you were moving a large pixel around on a screen that again we're going to lose a lot of our listeners here in terms of understanding the concept. But there was a day when TV screens weren't flat, and they used vacuum tubes and things like that, and they created static electricity on their front screen. So you could take a piece of plastic that you'd drawn a haunted house on and stick it to your screen, and then
That
drive a
was your graphics.
little pixel behind it to kind of go through the haunted house. Or you could play Pong. So you could do those things. So I think that would be, I mean, certainly I would have replaced uh, I would have placed the Odyssey controller on in place of either the Nintendo 64 or definitely the CD32 controller. But that's the only kind of miss I see beyond. I mean, if we got into and they did a little bit, with the activator or whatever the and but there have been a lot of failed motion capture. You know, how does a power glove fit into this conversation? How do some of these, there were some things that were not so hot either. But I think it's a pretty good list. Couple glaring issues I have, but outside of that, a good list overall.
Yeah, same. The early motion controls, especially the Nintendo stuff, the Power Glove was literally just a Nintendo controller strapped to your hand. It was weird. They had the motion controls for Punch Out, where you literally punched into a box. There was the Power Pad, which just translated your button presses to something you stepped on. Honestly, pretty close to the activator. The activator was just a slightly more advanced version of that. Things like that. So Nintendo was big on that kind of stuff. So all of that kind of stuff sucked and didn't really work. It's not that we invented that. It's just they finally figured out how to kind of make it work. That's because I guess good for them for not giving up on their dream motion controls, but it fizzled out just as quickly. PlayStation and Xbox both tried to put motion controls in, didn't take off, and the Wii U was a failure for them. I don't know if Wii U was any good. I never really played any games on there other than I think maybe one game at a store or something like that, but it did not sell well. So the motion control thing died just as quickly as it started.
Yep. Yeah, and then VR shows up and kind of changes the conversation entirely and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah. Also, I don't like some of the early controllers. Some of the early controllers are too small or laid out weird for my big monster hands. That's more of a me problem. But the Famicom, and which was the original Japanese version of what we know as the NES, and the Master System, both instead of the wire coming out on top as we're used to in America, the wire came out of the side of the controller, making it even more awkward to hold. I'm not a fan of that either. That was dumb.
yep, makes sense. Cool. Let us know in the comments after you completed my fairly extensive list of other things. If you got any additions, and we appreciate that. If you made it all the way to this point in the video, thank you. You're noble and you're strong, and good for you. Thanks again, and we'll catch you again soon. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bog Panda.